Imagine spending like 30 years of your life working this dead-end, super grueling manual labor job.
Oh, wow. Sounds exhausting already.
Right, and you're doing this in complete obscurity, all just to prepare for a leadership role that, get this, is only going to last 3 years.
Wait, 30 years of prep for 3 years of actual work.
Yeah. No followers, no platform, no one tracking your progress at all.
That is wild. I mean, in our modern world of, instant virality,
Exactly.
where we literally track our success by daily engagement metrics. I mean,
Yep.
that just sounds like a catastrophic failure.
A total waste of time, right? But according to the really disruptive manuscript we're diving into today, that specific ratio, like decades of absolute hiddenness for just a fraction of public impact, isn't a failure at all.
Really?
Yeah, it argues that it is the absolute prerequisite for an unstoppable mission.
Wow. I mean, it completely upends everything we're taught about ambition, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because we're so conditioned to look for the fast track. Like, if you have the talent, will you leverage it immediately?
Oh, for sure. Launch the podcast, start the company.
Right. If you have a vision, you launch it yesterday. But this text, it takes a sledgehammer to that entire framework.
So true.
It argues that the absolute most dangerous thing you can do is give a microphone to someone whose character just hasn't caught up to their charisma.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at this incredibly provocative, expansive manuscript. It's titled Unstoppable Mission.
And it is a fascinating read.
It is. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore the source's central premise, which is that the real test of leadership is not how fast or, how far you can go.
Right.
It's about how deeply you are formed before you ever step into the spotlight.
And we need to be really clear right up front about why this actually matters to you, the listener.
Yeah, good point.
Because the source text specifically analyzes Christian missionary leadership, right? It uses theological language, biblical framework.
Yeah, very specific context.
Yeah. But the structural insights it provides into human ambition and the extreme danger of unearned platforms, those apply universally.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you are, meeting a tech startup or trying to fix a toxic corporate culture, raising a family, or engaging in literal cross-cultural mission.
It all tracks.
It really challenges this frantic modern obsession with scale and personal branding. And it replaces those metrics with a concept it calls hidden formation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand what makes a mission truly unstoppable, the text suggests we actually have to look at why so many of them just crash and burn in the first place.
Yeah, and it makes a pretty brutal observation right out of the gate.
It really does. It argues that modern culture measures readiness by enthusiasm.
Yes, just raw enthusiasm.
Right, like we see someone who speaks confidently, who has a lot of momentum, maybe a really great pitch deck, and we just immediately put them in charge.
Which is so dangerous. We mistake velocity for direction.
Wow, yeah, velocity for direction.
And we mistake passion for actual preparation. The text points out that we consistently reward visibility before integrity.
Which is backwards.
Completely backwards.
Yeah.
And the warning it gives here is stark. The author writes that movements collapse when they are built on charisma without character, speed without substance, and ambition without spiritual depth.
Charisma without character. I feel like we see that exact headline every single week.
Every week. Another documentary, another scandal.
Right. A beloved founder, a famous CEO, some prominent religious leader, they build this massive empire, and then the whole thing just implodes.
Because of a massive moral or ethical failure behind closed doors.
Exactly. And the thesis the text offers to counter this phenomenon is that mission isn't merely something you do.
Right.
It's something you are formed to carry.
I love that phrasing, formed to carry.
Yeah.
The author insists that apostolic ministry, or, truly enduring leadership of any kind, isn't a role you just claim on a resume.
It's not just a job title.
No, it's a life that has to be proven. The text explicitly warns against rushing highly gifted people into heavyweight roles before their internal character structure has actually matured enough.
Because if it hasn't matured...
They won't be able to handle the crushing pressure of that role.
Cool. But I have to push back on that a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Especially given the context of the manuscript, because the text itself quotes this idea that the harvest is plentiful. It's talking about really urgent needs.
Very true.
We're talking about people suffering, communities needing help. The world is practically on fire.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
So if the need is that urgent, why slow down? It kind of reminds me of the Chinese bamboo tree.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. You water the ground for like 5 years and absolutely nothing happens above the surface.
Nothing at all.
All the growth is underground, building this massive root system. Then in year 5, it shoots up 90 feet in a few winds.
It's incredible.
But modern culture doesn't want the 5 years of watering dirt.
No, we absolutely hate watering dirt.
We want to build a 100-story skyscraper in a month. We want the ribbon-cutting ceremony now. So if someone has the raw talent to start building, why force them to sit around and water dirt?
Well, the bamboo analogy is perfect for this because it gets right to the heart of structural integrity.
Okay.
The text directly addresses this exact tension between urgency and readiness. And it says urgency does not cancel the need for maturity.
Urgency does not cancel maturity. Wow.
Yes, the need is massive. Yes, the world is on fire.
Well,
But the source argues that shallow formation is not just like a minor weakness or some cute personality quirk.
right.
It is a direct threat to the mission itself.
A threat to the mission.
Exactly. Think about your skyscraper analogy. If you build a 100-story skyscraper on a 2-inch foundation just because you were in a hurry,
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
it doesn't matter how shiny the glass is. A strong wind is going to knock it over.
And it's going to crush the very people you were trying to house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So rushing an immature leader into the field actually endangers the people they're supposed to be helping.
That is a sobering thought.
It really is. The text emphasizes that the world does not need more religious noise or, polished corporate-style branding campaigns disguised as ministry.
We have plenty of that.
We have so much of it.
Yeah.
What the world needs is embodied truth. And you just cannot embody truth if your internal foundation is completely hollow.
So a leader sent out without deep formation might start with a lot of zeal.
But the text warns they will inevitably end in confusion, burnout, or moral failure.
Embodied truth, meaning the messenger actually has to look like the message they are delivering.
Exactly. They have to live it.
So if human speed and raw ambition are the wrong engines for this kind of work, what is the right engine?
That is the million-dollar question.
And I think that transitions us to the text's theological foundation, this concept of the Missio Dei.
The Missio Dei, which translates to the mission of God.
Right.
The source states something here that feels almost alien to the modern entrepreneurial mindset.
Oh, totally.
It says the church does not invent mission. It enters it.
It enters it, meaning the mission is older than any human calling.
Exactly.
The manuscript describes it as a triune action. It says the Father sends the Son, the Father and Son send the Spirit, and the triune God sends the church.
Yes.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the practical implications of that. I mean, it basically means we aren't the authors of the story.
We are not the author.
And we're just characters stepping onto a stage where the play has been running since before time began.
And think about the profound psychological relief in that framework.
Relief. How so?
Well, contrast it with the modern leader who views themselves as an owner or a founder of a mission.
Oh, I see.
What happens to the owner's brain under pressure?
They completely panic.
They panic. They manipulate metrics. They crave absolute control because they truly believe the success or failure of the entire enterprise rests entirely on their shoulders.
Yeah, if they don't push the boulder up the mountain every single day, it crushes them.
It's a total recipe for insomnia and eventual burnout.
Because your identity is completely fused to the success of the project. If the project fails, you genuinely believe you are a failure.
But the text argues that when a leader views themselves not as an owner, but as a steward.
A steward.
Right, a steward participating in a divine drama that is already unfolding, then ambition loses its throne.
You don't have to manufacture significance anymore.
Exactly. The burden of self-glorification is completely removed because the mission itself is already eternally significant. It belongs to God. You are just invited to participate.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text uses this incredibly striking phrase. It warns about the danger of ambition wearing religious clothing.
Oh, that phrase hits hard.
I stopped and read that line 3 times. Ambition wearing religious clothing. It talks about how easy it is to disguise a lust for personal visibility as a burden for the unreached or, a passion for the marginalized.
It is the absolute ultimate camouflage for the ego.
It really is.
You can learn to speak all the accepted language of sacrifice and burden while actively, quietly engineering your own recognition.
Oh, man. You can give these passionate speeches about reaching the unreached while your subconscious is just desperately tracking how many people are watching you do it.
That is terrifying.
It is. Because it's so subtle. I mean, how do you even know the difference in yourself? How do you know if you're operating out of true stewardship or just raw ambition in a holy disguise?
Well, the author points to biblical examples to establish a baseline for this.
Okay, like who?
Look at Abraham.
Mm.
The text notes that Abraham wasn't out looking for some religious project to launch so he could, make a name for himself in the ancient Near East.
Right, he was just living his life.
Exactly. God initiated the call. And the text emphasizes that to protect against that ego-driven ambition, the community, the church, is meant to function as a discernment community.
A discernment community. So it's not just a solo endeavor where you just declare yourself ready.
Not at all.
Hmm.
The community is there to test a calling over time, to ensure it's not just a leader's pet project or an ego trip.
That makes so much sense.
The text insists that a calling might be very real, but it still has to be examined. A gift might be genuine, but it must still be governed by mature counsel.
I see. Because left to our own devices, we can convince ourselves of absolutely anything.
Oh, easily.
If I want a platform badly enough, I can easily convince myself that God urgently needs me on that platform right now.
Yeah.
So we rely on the discernment community to check those blind spots, which logically leads us to the actual mechanics of the calling itself.
Right.
If God owns the mission, how do we actually decode the call to join it?
The source draws a really hard line here. It says a calling is not just an internal feeling.
Which goes against everything we hear today.
Completely. We have to separate desire from readiness. The text acknowledges that many people feel a holy, stirring like a deep, genuine desire to help, to lead, to go.
Sure.
But they tragically confuse that emotional intensity with actual readiness. The text argues that a calling must be concerned outwardly.
Outwardly. How does an internal calling get outward confirmation?
Through observable fruit, through the providence of circumstances, and through the witness of that exact discernment community we just talked about.
Ah, I see.
The text says God awakens the heart, yes. But he also gives evidence. You don't just self-appoint based on a strong feeling.
The author uses a metaphor here that I think is the most vivid image in the entire manuscript.
It's a fire in the hearth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me quote it directly. It says, "If calling is the fire, character is the hearth that keeps it from destroying the house."
It's just a masterclass in analogy.
It really is, because fire is inherently powerful. It provides warmth, it illuminates the dark, it transforms whatever it touches.
Right.
A calling is exactly like that. It's this massive driving energy. But without a hearth, without stone boundaries to contain and direct it, fire is just a destructive force.
It consumes everything in its path.
Exactly. A massive calling without the containment of tested character is just a wildfire burning down your future house, your family, and your team.
So if character is the hearth, we have to ask, what are the cracks in the stone?
Yes. What are the specific hidden sins the text warns about that allow the fire to escape and burn everything down?
The source outlines several specific internal fractures. The first is pride, which the text notes almost always manifests as defensiveness.
Defensiveness. That's interesting.
It's the absolute unwillingness to receive correction or to admit fault.
Well, that makes sense. If you can't be corrected, your fire is completely uncontained. No one can tell you you're burning the house down.
Exactly. Then there is the lust for significance, which it describes as an addiction to admiration.
Let's hover on that one for a second. An addiction to admiration. The text argues that once a person begins to live for the emotional reward of being noticed, every single decision they make begins to serve that image.
Yes.
The soul starts making these tiny, almost imperceptible bargains. Like, say this because it plays well with the audience. Hide that because it makes you look weak. Manage the brand at all costs.
And those micro-bargains slowly, surely hollow out the leader's integrity.
They create cracks in the hearth.
Exactly. Another major crack in the hearth is hidden bitterness.
Hidden bitterness.
The text notes very realistically that ministry, or really any leadership, exposes people to profound disappointment and betrayal.
People will let you down.
They will. And if that pain isn't actively surrendered and healed, it hardens into resentment.
Wow.
You end up with leaders who are publicly preaching grace, but privately, they're just seething with cynicism.
That is a terrifying image. And the text also points to impatience, right?
Yes, impatience. Wanting the fruit of maturity without being willing to endure the slow, boring process of maturity.
We want year 5 bamboo in year 1.
Demanding the harvest in year 1 instead of waiting.
Exactly.
So if you take a highly gifted leader who has a massive calling, a huge fire, But they're highly defensive,
Yeah.
addicted to social media admiration, secretly harboring resentment against past mentors, and wildly impatient for success.
Their hearth is full of cracks. The house is going to burn.
And this is exactly why the text leans heavily on Jesus' warning. By their fruit you will recognize them.
The author points out that you can build an elaborate stage around a dead tree, and you can even hang artificial apples on the branches to fool the crowd from a distance.
You can fake it for a while.
But you cannot fake the actual organic fruit over the long haul. Public trust only becomes safe when private faithfulness has already been established.
Okay, so if private faithfulness is the goal and character is the hearth, where exactly is that hearth built?
Right.
Because you don't build a stone hearth while the house is actively on fire.
No, you don't.
And you certainly don't build it while standing on a stage in front of an audience. According to the text, the hearth is forged in obscurity.
Yes, the text calls this the workshop of the hidden years.
The workshop of the hidden years.
It argues that God historically and consistently prepares his servants in hidden places. And the critical paradigm shift here is how we actually view that hiddenness.
How so?
The author insists that hiddenness is not a delay. It is not a glitch in the plan. It is not an interruption, and it is certainly not a punishment.
Then what is it?
It is a workshop. It is a divine mercy that prevents you from being deployed before you are ready to survive the deployment.
The manuscript does these deep dives into biblical figures to prove this, and it completely shatters our modern timeline of success.
Oh, it really does.
Let's walk through them, because the sheer length of time these people spent doing absolutely nothing public is staggering.
It's almost offensive to our modern sensibilities.
Truly. Take Moses.
Moses is the classic example. He grows up in the palace, highly educated, confident, ready to liberate his people. He tries to do it in his own strength, completely fails, and flees.
And then what happens?
He spends 40 years in Midian. 40 years.
40 years. I mean, imagine the psychological breakdown of your ego over 4 decades.
You go from being the Prince of Egypt to a shepherd in the middle of nowhere just talking to sheep.
But the text argues that this was the required curriculum. Moses had to be systematically stripped of his Egyptian confidence. He had to learn the harsh realities of the wilderness as a humble, unknown shepherd before he could ever be trusted to lead an entire nation of millions through that exact same wilderness.
The desert was his workshop.
Exactly. Then you have David. Prophet Samuel comes to his house. The oil is literally poured on his head. He is anointed as the rightful king of Israel.
And what happens next? Does he go straight to the throne room?
No. He's sent right back out to the sheep.
He goes back to the pasture. The text points out the intense psychological isolation of David's preparation.
He had to learn to fight a lion and a bear in secret, where no one was clapping and absolutely no one was taking notes.
Just him and God.
Right. He had to learn how to worship God in a lonely, damp cave while running for his life long before he ever faced a giant like Goliath in public, and long before he ever wore a crown.
Joseph is another huge one. He has these grand prophetic dreams of leadership as a teenager.
And his reward for those dreams is being sold into slavery by his own brothers.
Yeah, and then thrown into a literal dungeon for years based on a false accusation.
And in that dungeon, in absolute obscurity, the text notes he learned administration, resilience, and patience.
He learned how to endure staggering injustice without letting it mutate into that hidden bitterness we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Even Paul, after this blinding, dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, he doesn't immediately become the greatest missionary in the history of the church.
He just disappears.
The text notes he spends years in hiddenness in Arabia.
Why? What was he doing?
Well, he had an entire Pharisaical worldview that needed to be dismantled. The text says he had to have his dense, rigid theology completely reoriented by grace before he could safely step onto the public stage.
And then, of course, the ultimate example the text provides is Jesus himself.
Right.
30 years of an ordinary, hidden life in Nazareth, working a regular manual labor job, dealing with difficult neighbors, attending synagogue, living in complete obscurity, all for just 3 years of public ministry.
What's fascinating here is why the author believes this hiddenness is required across the board.
What's the reason?
The text posits that hiddenness is the ultimate diagnostic tool. It reveals whether you actually love God or if you just love the idea of being used by God.
Wow. Let that sink in for a second. Do you love God, or do you love the thrill of being a tool in God's hand while people watch?
Exactly. It forces a leader to live without recognition. It strips away the applause, the titles, the speaking engagements.
If your identity is tied to your public output, hiddenness feels like death.
It does. But if your identity is tied to your stewardship, hiddenness is just a different phase of the work.
The text has this beautiful, quiet idea that ordinary obedience is sacred formation.
Ordinary obedience.
That is so deeply countercultural today. We live in an era where everyone is looking for the hack to go viral immediately. We want the shortcut to the platform.
Oh, yeah.
But the text is asking these grinding, incredibly slow questions of the reader. Like, can you keep praying when nothing changes?
Can you genuinely rejoice in a rival's success?
Ouch. Can you remain gentle and kind when you are completely overlooked for a promotion you deserved?
Because if you cannot be faithful in the quiet, mundane, hidden things, the text argues you are fundamentally unprepared for the loud, public things.
The immense pressure of the public platform will instantly crush a hollow, unformed foundation.
Which brings us to the next structural element of the manuscript. The hidden years build the character, they build the hearth. But having a pure heart isn't enough to survive the actual mission field.
No, it's not.
The mind also needs a robust framework to process reality. It's not just about emotional resilience. You have to have a strong intellectual and theological map.
This transitions us to the necessity of deep theology, or what the text calls the weight-bearing architecture.
The source is incredibly blunt in this section. It states, mission without theology becomes activism. Theology without mission becomes abstraction.
Okay, let's break that down. Mission without theology is just running around doing good deeds without any anchoring truth.
Right.
But theology without mission is just a bunch of academics sitting in a room arguing over Greek verbs while the world burns outside.
Precisely. The text argues that a shallow theology will inevitably buckle under the weight of opposition, delay, and moral ambiguity on the field. You need an architecture of endurance.
Wait, let me pause you right there. Let's ground this. When we say theology, to most people, that sounds like graduate-level academic debates.
Sure, it sounds dry.
It sounds totally disconnected from the dirt and sweat of actually helping people. How does the author translate these high-level concepts into survival tools for a missionary?
Well, the text walks through 3 specific theological pillars to show how intensely practical they are.
Okay.
The first pillar is the image of God. The author argues that deeply understanding that every single human being bears the image of God completely changes how you operate.
How so?
It prevents a leader from treating local people as projects or targets for conversion. It forces reverence. You cannot colonize, patronize, or manipulate someone if you truly believe they reflect the divine.
That makes a lot of sense. It guards against a savior complex. What's the second pillar?
The second is the doctrine of the fall, or the reality of human sin and brokenness.
Now, how does focusing on human brokenness help a leader survive? Doesn't that just make you super depressed?
Actually, the text argues it prevents both naivete and cynicism.
Oh, interesting.
If you go into a mission field, or really any leadership role,
Eh.
believing everyone is inherently perfect and progress is always going to be a smooth upward line, you will be destroyed by your first betrayal.
You'll be totally blindsided.
Right. The doctrine of the fall explains why human resistance is so deep, why corruption exists in the exact systems you're trying to fix, and why progress is never linear. It sets realistic expectations so you aren't derailed every time a plan fails.
And the third pillar is eschatology, the theology of the end times. Now, I definitely need you to unpack this one.
I figured you would.
Because typically, eschatology sounds like apocalyptic charts and debates about the end of the world. How on earth does that keep a missionary from burning out on a random Tuesday when their funding gets cut?
It's all about hope and perspective. The text describes the eschatological vision as the final guaranteed ending of the story.
Which is?
Worship from all nations, every tear wiped away, absolute justice. Knowing that final vision means you understand that your current obscurity, your current delays, and even your apparent failures are just middle chapters.
You know how the story ends.
Exactly. The victory is already secured. Therefore, you don't panic in the middle of the book when the plot gets dark.
So what does this all mean for the leader on the ground? When a project stalls for the 3rd year in a row, or the local community violently rejects the message, how does this architecture actually function?
The text explains that a theologically grounded missionary interprets their suffering through the lens of Scripture, rather than through the lens of their own fragile ego.
That is a massive difference.
Massive. When things go terribly wrong, an ungrounded leader assumes God has abandoned them, or they conclude they are a massive failure and just quit. But a grounded leader understands the theology of the cross. They understand that historically, suffering and resistance are the exact mechanisms through which redemption usually happens. They expect resistance because their theological framework prepared them for it.
It's like being given a highly detailed map of a treacherous mountain range before you start climbing.
Great analogy.
When you hit a terrifying, steep cliff face, you don't panic and assume you took a wrong turn. You pull out the map, look at the topography, and say, ah, yes, the cliff. The map said this was going to be here. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
That's a perfect way to look at it. Without that map, you hit the cliff, assume you failed, lose all your confidence, and pack it in. Deep theology is the map.
Which means we are heading straight into the hostile terrain itself. The theology provides the map, but the text guarantees that the missionary's character will be violently tested by the environment.
Yes, this is the crucible. Character under pressure.
And mission work is unique because it places inherently imperfect people into extreme situations where their hidden weaknesses become visible incredibly fast.
The text has this sobering, profound line. It says, God does not waste pressure. Pressure reveals what comfort successfully hides.
Let's talk about the specific tests the manuscript outlines, because even though they are written for cross-cultural missionaries, they are universally relatable to anyone trying to do something difficult.
Absolutely.
The first test is financial strain.
The text argues that financial strain ruthlessly reveals who the worker actually trusts. Imagine the budget is thin. The donors are asking for massive, exciting updates.
Oh, the pressure.
Does the leader begin to manipulate the donors? Do they exaggerate their results on the newsletter to ensure the checks keep coming? Or do they operate with integrity and depend quietly on God to provide?
The pressure forces the hidden lack of trust right out into the open.
What about the second test, cultural misunderstanding? I imagine a huge friction point is stepping on cultural landmines. You go in with good intentions, but you accidentally insult the local leadership.
Yes, and the text says this test reveals whether a leader is truly teachable or fiercely defensive.
Right.
When you do something offensive by accident and a local leader corrects you, do you double down on your own cultural superiority? Do you get defensive and explain why your way is actually better?
Or do you humbly apologize and ask to be educated?
Exactly. And the third test is loneliness.
How does the text say isolation rewires a leader's brain?
Loneliness reveals where your identity is actually anchored. If your identity is anchored in human affirmation, isolation will break you.
It'll just crush you.
The text points out that when the applause stops, when you are physically isolated from your support network, there is a massive temptation to seek artificial connection.
Like doom scrolling. Maybe doom scrolling, maybe it's craving social media validation, or maybe it's deeper moral compromises. The crucible of loneliness asks a really hard question. When no one is watching, is God enough for you?
The author highlights some incredible historical figures who endured this specific crucible. People like William Carey, Hudson Taylor, Adoniram Judson, and Amy Carmichael.
Heavy-hitters.
And it's vital to tell their stories, not just drop their names, because the level of pressure they faced is almost unfathomable to a modern audience.
Take Adoniram Judson. He went to Burma in the early 1800s. He spent years laboring just to learn the language and translate the text. He faced constant disease, imprisonment, and the agonizing deaths of his wives and children.
It's just devastating.
Or William Carey in India. He spent years translating a massive dictionary and biblical texts, only to have a fire completely destroy his printing press and years of his life's work in a single night.
And he didn't quit. He literally woke up, looked at the ashes, and started over. The text emphasizes that the enduring legacy of these figures wasn't just raw brilliance or some strategic corporate genius.
No.
It was their immense, stubborn capacity to remain faithful under unimaginable psychological and emotional strain. They endured decades of obscure labor, grief, and fierce resistance.
Let me push back on your use of the word stubborn there, because the manuscript actually makes a very sharp, very important distinction between stubbornness and endurance.
Oh, right, because it's incredibly easy for leaders to mistake their own toxic, ego-driven stubbornness for holy endurance.
Yes.
They think everyone is against me, so I must be a martyr, when in reality, they're just impossible to work with. How does the text differentiate them?
The author writes, stubbornness refuses correction. Endurance receives correction and continues.
Wow, that is a critical diagnostic.
Stubbornness clings desperately to self-will. It masks deep-seated pride. It says, I am right, everyone else is blind, and I will force this project to work no matter who I destroy in the process.
So a stubborn leader is essentially a bulldozer.
Yes, but endurance is entirely different. Endurance clings to Christ. It is often quiet, highly adaptable, and unseen.
A stubborn leader destroys the team around them to protect their ego.
But an enduring leader absorbs the pressure of the environment, protects the team, and remains open to changing methods while staying fixed on the mission.
This raises a really important question. If a leader has survived all of this, if they are formed in character, anchored in theology, and their endurance has been tested by the crucible of pressure, how do they actually open their mouth in a foreign culture without doing more harm than good?
Right. How do they actually do the job?
How do they translate their mission?
Well, this brings us to the final major theme of the text, the art of cross-cultural translation. The source notes that mission is not merely geographical movement, it is interpretive work.
Interpretive work.
And it warns against two major diametrically opposed errors when trying to cross a cultural boundary. The first error is cultural imperialism.
Cultural imperialism, that's essentially confusing the actual gospel with your own cultural habits, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's assuming that your specific way of speaking, your preferred leadership structure, your style of music, or your meeting format is the only biblical or correct way.
Right.
Imperialism forces the local culture to adopt the missionary's foreign customs just to receive the core message. It wraps the truth in an unnecessary, heavy cultural blanket.
And the opposing error is compromise. I struggle with the line between contextualization and compromise.
It's a tough line.
If you adapt too much to a local culture to avoid imperialism, aren't you just watering down the message? Where does the author draw the line?
Compromise, according to the text, is actively removing the necessary offense of the gospel just to be liked or accepted by the host culture.
Okay, so making it palatable.
Right. It is watering down the truth so it is easily swallowed. But the author warns that in the process of removing the friction, the message ceases to be the truth. It just becomes a mirror reflecting the host culture back to itself.
So what is the middle path? How do you thread that needle?
The text calls the middle path faithful contextualization. And it points to the incarnation of Jesus as the absolute controlling model for this.
Okay.
Think about it. Jesus didn't just shout theological truths from heaven through a divine megaphone. He took on physical flesh. He learned to speak local Aramaic.
Right. He was embedded.
He didn't use abstract philosophical arguments. He used local, culturally resonant stories about sheep, vineyards, and coins. He entered the culture completely to save it.
The text frames this incarnational approach around the concept of listening, but it doesn't frame listening as just like a soft HR communication skill. It calls listening a spiritual discipline.
Yes. You have to deeply study the history, the specific generational wounds, the deep-seated fears, and the highest hopes of a people group long before you ever earn the right to open your mouth and offer an answer.
The manuscript brings up a fascinating historical example of this. The Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. The early Jewish church had this massive paradigm-shifting realization.
Yes, the Gentiles didn't have to become culturally Jewish in order to follow Christ.
Exactly. They didn't have to adopt the dietary laws or the Mosaic cultural identity. The core message could cross the cultural boundary without dragging the cultural baggage with it.
And we see the exact same genius in the Apostle Paul when he goes to Athens. The text notes that Paul didn't walk into the Areopagus and immediately start condemning their entire way of life.
He observed their city.
He found an altar to the unknown God and used it as a starting point. He even quoted their own local pagan poets to build a conversational bridge to the truth of the gospel. He honored the context of his audience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text distills all of this down to one profound distinction. Truth is unchanging. Wisdom is contextual.
That phrase is the absolute crux of cross-cultural work. A missionary must study the history of a people before speaking into their future.
The author paints a picture of two hypothetical missionaries to illustrate this, right?
Yes, the first missionary arrives loud, fast, and absolutely certain of his imported methods. He demands quick compliance and immediate results.
And the local community, which has centuries of history and intuition, immediately senses that he hasn't actually seen them. He just sees them as a project.
So they quietly smile, nod, and eventually tune him completely out.
Exactly. But the second missionary arrives slow. He learns the local names. He learns how to pronounce them correctly. He listens to the history of their conflicts.
He explicitly honors the existing local leaders.
He never lowers the standard of truth, but he carries that truth with immense visible care. And the text says the future belongs to him. The future belongs to the humble. Because People can always tell when they're being managed as a metric, and they can tell when they're being honored as a human being.
Okay, let's synthesize this incredible, challenging journey we've been on today.
Let's do it.
The text argues that true, unstoppable mission is not about the spectacular speed of your launch. It is entirely about the depth and the integrity of your roots.
Right.
It requires the humility to acknowledge God as the true owner of the mission. It requires submitting willingly to the slow, painful workshop of the hidden years. You have to build a stone hearth of character so that your calling doesn't become a wildfire that burns down your house.
It requires anchoring your mind in a weight-bearing theology, enduring the crucible of pressure without mutating into bitterness, and having the discipline to humbly listen to a culture before trying to change it.
And we want to connect this directly to you, the learner listening right now. Think about your own life, whatever your specific context is.
Yeah, think about where you are right now.
Maybe you are grinding away trying to build a startup and getting zero traction. Maybe you are leading a family through an incredibly dark, difficult season. Or maybe you were just waiting and waiting for a breakthrough in your career that feels like it's never going to come.
The message of this text to you is that your current obscurity is not a delay. It is not a punishment. It is your Midian. It is your lonely pasture. It is your workshop.
God is painstakingly building your hearth right now so that you don't burn down your own future when the fire finally catches.
That is a profound reframe of our waiting seasons. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay.
The source material asks this incredibly searching question. Can I be formed enough to endure once I arrive? But I want you to think about this, pushing just a little bit beyond the text.
What is it?
If you knew with absolute unwavering certainty that your current season of frustration, your current silence, your current agonizing lack of progress, if you knew it was actually the exact custom-designed curriculum required to keep you from destroying yourself when you finally get the power and the platform you've been begging for, how would you change the way you live today?
Wow.
Would you finally stop fighting the delay? Would you lean in and let the roots grow deep? Because remember, we don't actually want a rocket launch. We want roots.
We want to be formed to carry the weight.
Thanks for diving deep with us.